Hello, and welcome to Hope and Healing. My name is Jeff Friedman. I'm your host. And we will be coming to you weekly on Creative Tucson. And each week, I hope to be able to interview a person who works in the field of mental or emotional health, life optimization. And so we are hoping to be able to give the Tucson community information on a wide variety of mental and emotional health issues, how those are recognized, how those are treated, and how a person successfully recovers if they are suffering from one of these disorders. And today, our guest is Kiki Cheney. And Kiki is a certified professional coach. She does workshops. She's a teacher as well. Kiki's originally from Cincinnati, but has traveled all over the place, living in Europe for some time and in New York City for, I think, about 20 years. She has worked as an executive assistant, a waitress, fundraiser, and attorney. And she has been living in Tucson for several years now. Kiki loves the color pink, loves to let her 5-year-old inside her have a voice, and enjoys learning always. She believes in being kind is better than being nice. So welcome to Hope and Healing, Kiki.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
So what's the distinction? What's the difference between being kind and being nice?
As I use the two words and understand it, being nice, when we're young, be nice, is more superficial. And when I'm kind, I'm asked to be present in a much fuller way. I'm asked to really respect the other person because it invites me to believe that the other person can handle the answer I give to their question. And it asks me to be truthful in a way that being nice often doesn't.
So when you're with someone who is suffering, maybe somebody who may be in tears, the last thing you want to do is, oh, sweetie, it's okay, it's okay, don't worry.
Exactly, and I think in that situation, being kind would allow me to say, I hear you're suffering, I can tell you're suffering, and I may not know what to say, and I'll say, words don't come to me, and yet I can just be with you.
Exactly. And by doing that, the unspoken message, which I think is a powerful message, is I have confidence in your ability to be with this pain, and later the pain will be gone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But that's not easy.
No, and at the same time, I think it's a lot easier than being nice because it's more authentic and it's deeper and it honors the other person in a way that most people in that situation especially crave. It's supportive. So I'd put it a little differently. It may not be comfortable.
Exactly.
But it's certainly better.
So a person who makes the choice to be kind rather than merely nice is someone who has faced up to their own insecurities and has gained that ability to be present with people who are suffering.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think that one of my lessons in this life has been to acknowledge that I can't be perfect, because Lord knows I spent years trying. And I've learned the freedom and experienced the joy that comes with no longer asking myself to be perfect. Life is so much more, I'm so much more engaged with life, and life is so much more interesting and fun because I have accepted that I'm human. And it's a different lens through which to experience everything because the imperfections are really what's so beautiful. And that sounds cliche and trite perhaps, but it's true, and there's a reason cliches exist. There's a truth to them.
Was it difficult to be able to get to the place where you were able to accept and even embrace your own uncertainties, your own imperfections?
Hell yeah. Yes. It was extremely difficult. And it wasn't a linear progression. It was lots of stops and starts. I fell down, scraped my knee, sometimes stayed on all fours, but just persevered and got up again. And I think what kept me going throughout that process was that every time I learned a little something. And what I love about getting older is that I can now trust that experiences often are clearer only in hindsight. So a lot of the process, one of the most important things I learned was that I have value no matter what I do, no matter how I look. And it took years for me to understand that. And then it took even longer for me to accept it and believe it. But I started on the journey when what got me through my mother's death and helped me survive no longer served me. I was using the same skills, but the behavior wasn't helpful anymore. As a young adult, what helped me at 14 wasn't appropriate.
Right.
And I didn't know what else to do. I didn't have tools to replace the ones that I recognized didn't serve me, but I didn't know what to do. So I went to therapy, and that started me on a path that helped me begin to understand that it's okay not to be perfect. Because I thought being perfect meant being an ice maiden, not having emotions, floating above it all. And not only is that impossible, it's also really boring. So.
Was it a long journey?
Yeah, and I think it continues. There are still times in stress when I'm fearful that I revert instinctively, but I'm able to catch myself a lot quicker. So it's been a long journey. I'm 50 now. My mother died when I was 14, so almost from the day after my mother died, it began, even though I wasn't always aware of it.
Would you be willing to talk a little bit about your mom's death, and what were some of the ways that you kept yourself alive after your mom passed?
You know, it's been 35 years and I still well up. I kept myself alive by, at first, pushing the emotion down and thinking that no emotion could affect me. So I was stalwart, I was stoic. I also kept myself alive by being really angry and making sure that no one got too close. I became really good at that. And I survived by pretending that I was okay. It's okay, I'm fine. And it was so clear to everyone else that I wasn't, but my veneer was so thick that it took quite a while to penetrate and have me able to accept that it wasn't fine and that it was okay not to be fine. That was the problem. I thought that if I wasn't fine, I was less than, and that I wouldn't survive, that I would just implode or crumble and never be able to get up. And that's obviously not true. I sit here before you today very happy, but again, I couldn't figure it all out. It was just so confusing. So emotions were labeled as bad. Even if they were happy emotions, if I was happy, I was too happy. If I was confused, then I should have had it all figured out, which is ridiculous, but that was the message I gave myself.
You know, I'm interviewing you for a TV show now, but the therapist in me, I have the urge to ask the question, if you could talk to that 14-year-old right now, what would you say to her and what would she say to you?
I would say to her that, Kiki, you are beautiful and it's okay to be confused and it's okay to be angry and it's okay to not have all the answers. And it's okay to accept help.
Right.
And it's okay to want help. And she would probably say to me, I don't think so.
Yeah.
But in a dark room by herself, she might be so grateful that someone was willing to try.
You know, I've always loved angry teenagers, especially young women. And I think that that way of coping is not something that you use today, but the fact that that was one that you landed on at such a young age, I think speaks volumes about you. Do you agree with that?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think that so many of us are survivors,
Yeah.
and we often get labeled as something else because people don't recognize that the behavior that expresses that might not be appropriate for the situation, and they then stop. They don't look beyond the behavior to figure out why is the person trying to survive, or how are they trying to survive. Yeah.
And they fall victim to that kind of push piece. And I think especially adolescents, unless you can engage them while they're doing that, you're going nowhere with them.
Well, and I volunteer at Tunadito, which is a wonderful nonprofit here in Tucson, whose mission is to not have any child grieve alone. And I work with teenagers, not surprisingly, because I was one when my mother died. And there's a wide variety of behaviors in the room when I'm with them, because there's a variety of time that's passed since the person's death. And they exhibit the range from having worked it out to being fiercely upset. And the safe space that we create is intended to let them know it's okay to have every single emotion you are, and good for you for showing up. 'Cause that's sometimes the best we can do.
That's refreshing and wonderful to hear. So I wanted to get into some of what you do in coaching. And I'd like to begin by asking, can you give us an example of something that you struggled through personally that has set you up to be the right person to coach a particular problem today, or a particular person who is struggling with something?
Well, I'll begin to answer your question by telling you that the type of coaching which I've been credentialed is coactive coaching, and it does not give advice. And people often say, well, then what good is it? I need advice. Well, the beauty lies in that, in my experience at least, whenever I ask for advice, I ask enough people until I hear what I want to. So it doesn't really serve the person to give advice. What I do is help them figure out what their answer is for them. To fall back on the example of my own life that we've been talking about, I was afraid to sort of step out of my comfort zone. I was, as much as I love adventure now, and I've never done anything like this before, and I said, sure, this is exciting, I'll do it. I was afraid to do that when I was younger. And many of the people who I coach ask me to hold them accountable to not only dreaming bigger than they might on their own, but believing that they can be bigger. Most of the folks with whom I end up working have a level of self-awareness that allows them to identify what they want, even if they're not sure the shape or the form in which it might be packaged, but they're a little nervous to actually embrace all that they can be. And one of my roles is to keep that stage a big one and invite them to step onto it and take the space up and be unapologetic for how fabulous they can be. So that's a particular situation where I can not only empathize, but sometimes sympathize. I get that it's scary. I get that it's uncomfortable. and go forward. Move.
And our job is to create an environment that is sufficiently safe where a person will be willing to do that, will be willing to step outside their comfort zone and get in touch with a little vulnerability.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I think I'm able to do well is bring some fun into it.
Yeah.
It's important, serious work, human development and integration of all the different parts of ourselves, and yet if it's serious, then it's heavy and it's boring and it's not sustainable.
You know, I'm listening to you and talking about your work, and I've been a therapist for 30 years. And I'm hearing that in your work as a coach, what you're doing is not that different than what I have done as a therapist. So can you help draw a distinction between what a coach does and what a therapist does? Okay.
I think one very, and I'm drawing on my own experience in therapy to distinguish this example right now, is that one very big difference is that in therapy, there's often an exploration of why someone feels a certain way, why someone behaves a certain way. And there are often details that I was asked to provide to my therapist to further the conversation.
Right.
It's amazing what I don't need to know as a coach. And the details often aren't necessary to moving forward. As well as the fact that my work is very much focused on the present and the future. There's very little interest and attention, perhaps is a better word, that I spend on the past. So it's very much present focused and future focused.
Right.
Does that answer the question?
I think it answers the question very well. For a long time, I was a little bit confused about the difference between counseling and psychotherapy. And it was a question that I would sometimes ask if I was with somebody and I thought, oh, this person is pretty knowledgeable. Let me just shoot that question at them. What's the difference between counseling and psychotherapy? And I was getting these weak, terrible, hemming and hawing answers for years, literally. And finally, I asked one of my professors what the difference was, and he said, the difference between counseling and psychotherapy is that their aims are different. Counseling aims to change the behavior. Psychotherapy aims to change the intrapsychic process. So that sounds simple until you get into practice. So if you're in a conversation with one of your clients, or I'm in a conversation with somebody I'm working with, and we do something, or we have an interaction, or I say something, or they say something, and as a result of that, their behavior changes, then I've just counseled them. If, on the other hand, we do the exact same thing, and what changes is their intrapsychic process, then we've just done psychotherapy. So I think when you get right down to it, it's impossible a lot of times to do one without doing the other. And now I'm going to include coaching with that too.
Well, thank you. As much as I love coaching, I will tell you that I think that I know that there are things in coaching that we can't do that a therapist does.
Well, I understand that,
Okay.
and there are things that you won't take on,
Right.
and there are areas that you may not go to, and if you feel that there's a need for that, you can refer.
Right.
But it just seems like, and we were actually talking about this, Kiki and I were talking about this while we were waiting for the set to be put in place. And we were talking about what is it that makes a helping relationship powerful or not powerful. And I think what we hit on was it's the genuineness of the relationship, and that has a lot to do with the practitioner. The second thing is that some people have a certain potency to them and others don't. And I don't think that you can train it into a person. It's either you have it or you don't. Or you have that kind heart or you don't. And if you are trying to pretend, you're in trouble, I believe, whether you're coaching or counseling or doing psychotherapy.
Or in a relationship with your friend.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you were talking a little while ago about being able to embrace imperfection. And I think that's just such a wonderful thing. But I don't think many people are able to do that. I don't know. Do you? Do you think?
Maybe not consciously, because none of us are perfect. But to be serious about it, I don't know. I think that it's more a question perhaps of not feeling secure enough or trusting that it's okay to not be perfect.
Exactly.
Does that make sense?
Well, it does make sense. And you know, I always am interested in what a person was like when they were like 4 years old. Before they put on the character armor, how did they present? And if I go back in my own life to that age, that was a time when the very powerful message was it's not okay to be imperfect. It's not okay to have these flaws. And I grew up 20 years before you did, but back in the 50s, that sort of was the drill. And I think that most of the households, that's how they raised kids. I think it's probably better today. Hopefully it is.
That's my sense. I don't
Good.
have kids.
Good.
Yeah, it's interesting that my experience, both personally as well as with my clients, is that often those traits of the 4 or 5 year old are precisely often those that help them be successful later. For instance, I was told I was too loud. I was too enthusiastic. I was too of so many different things, too talkative. And while I think one of the talents I bring to coaching is that I'm a good listener, I'm also not afraid to say things. And the trick is being unattached to whether or not I'm right about it. But being excited and being enthusiastic and being adventurous and being happy and being happy to share all of that is what makes me interesting and receptive as a coach. I'm not just wooden listening with my finger on my chin musing about what I'm hearing. There's an exchange and an interaction. And so that's been my experience with clients too. So often what they are labeled as being rash, outspoken. I'm thinking of a client in particular who was branded as those things in her family. And in fact, as a teenager, she jumped out of a window and because she was bored in school one day. Well, the behavior wasn't appropriate and she got reprimanded. But for the rest of her life, the next 30 years, she adopted and continued to believe that she was those negative things, despite having built a successful business, having a good marriage, kids to whom she was fiercely loyal and who were grateful for her love and had good relationship with her. And it was in our work together that she began to recognize that the behavior was inappropriate, but the personality behind it wasn't necessarily. And so she chose to believe her own experience instead of the story that people told her about herself.
Right. Kiki, I have a few more questions that I wanted to ask, and unfortunately we're out of time, but you have been such a wonderful, charming guest.
Oh, thank you.
It's been fun talking to you.
It's been a delight to be here. This is
fun. You are certainly welcome, and I hope that we have a chance to have you back on the show.
Thank you.
So would you like to take a minute and give our guests some contact information in case they want to get in touch with you?
I'd love to. My website is Coaching by Kiki, K-I-K-I, so coachingbykiki.com, and my email address is kiki@coachingbykiki.com.
Well, thanks again for being here. And please join us next week. We'll have another guest who works in the field of mental and emotional health, and I thank you for being with us today.